looks like we've got a pretty full house right now. So let me begin. I'm Penny Bryden. I'm the president of the Canadian Historical Association, and I'm also an uninvited guest on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples. And I live and work in a place with which the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanich peoples' relationship continues to this day. It's my great pleasure to open the third of our webinar series on precarity in response to the Precarious Historians Manifesto. This third one addresses disciplinary caring. The first two, which were in the fall and then earlier this year, are available, have been recorded and are available to view. But I will turn this over now to the chair of this session, Barrington Walker, who will introduce the speakers, and I will get my pen and paper out, or my keyboard functioning, and listen enthusiastically and attentively to the comments of the speakers today. So welcome all, and over to you, Barrington.
Thank you very much, Penny. My name is Barrington Walker. I am professor of history at Wilfrid Laurier University. I also have an administrative post at my university. I'm the associate vice president, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and I'm ensconced in the office of the VP academic. And it's my great pleasure to be the facilitator, moderator, host of this last discussion that we've been having. As Penny said, the last in a series of discussions on precarity in the historical profession. And this discussion in particular will be turning the lens on the association itself, the Canadian Historical Association. I am going to begin by introducing our first speaker, the first speaker I have on my list, and that is Andrea Edinger. She is a historian of gender and ethnicity in post-war Canada. She holds a PhD from the University of Victoria and has worked for the last 11 years as a sessional instructor at institutions across BC and more recently Quebec. She is most well known as the creator of Unwritten Histories, a blog dedicated to making academic history accessible. She has written extensively on matters related to precarity for outlets like Active History and University Affairs. Andrea?
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here today. I am speaking to you from Tiohtià:ke, also known as Montreal, which is the traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation, as well as a gathering place for many First Nations over the past millennia. So before I start, I wanted to express my appreciation for CHA and for Stephen High for organizing this session and creating a forum for us to talk about matters relating to precarity. So thank you very much. I do have to say, though, that I had a really hard time trying to figure out what to say for this panel. And I spent a lot of time thinking about it. And I kept coming back to a question that I was asked by an acquaintance who asked me that if academia was a glass of water, what color would the water inside the glass be? And I didn't even think. The first thing I said was black sludge. And so she looked me in the eye and said, well, then why are you drinking it? I thought that was a really good question, and I didn't have a really good answer for her at the time. I think I said something about how like the people were amazing and I've had all of these fantastic relationships, and but that the system itself was awful. And then she asked me again, you know, who's the system? What is the system? Who gets to decide what the system is? And I think the question in the end is all of us. And I think that that's a really important point, and that's something I think that I wanted to highlight today. So because I have really mixed feelings about this panel series, how things have unfolded. And to be really honest with you, I very much considered pulling out because this has been, this has brought up a lot of emotions for a lot of people, in particular those of us who have spent a great number of years working as a sessional instructor. I also just kept wondering, what exactly are we doing here? You know, what is the goal? What are we trying to accomplish? Because I'm not sure that I know or I understand. There have been a number of themes, but you know, sometimes they fit with precarity, sometimes they haven't. I know that the goal was to engage with the Precarious Historians Manifesto, and I think that's great. But the previous two panels have featured speakers who dispute the relevancy of this particular issue, who have dismissed the lived reality of long-term sessional instructors, said that there's no real problem, blamed sessional instructors for their particular situations, or mostly just, you know, exclaimed that this is the first time that they'd learned about this and that they felt really bad. It also feels to me like we're trying to shoehorn other issues into this discussion. Like, I think that matters relating to diversity, equity, and inclusion are supremely important, and I think they deserve their own forum. And I think the same is true for unionization. And finally, these sessions have been, for the most part, dominated by tenure track and tenure professors. There have only been a couple of sessional instructors who have spoken at these panels previously. And I do want to pay particular attention to their contributions, in particular those of Catherine Merton-Steer, Stacy Zimbrisky, Ian Mosby, Jeremy Malloy, and David Tuff, who's speaking today, who have been unflinchingly honest in their sharing of their experiences and extraordinarily generous in that. But I know that I'm also not the only person who's feeling these very mixed feelings. Behind the scenes, I've been talking to other people who've worked for many years as sessional instructors, as well as graduate students, and they've expressed the same level of frustration and even anger and bitterness at these discussions. The general feeling that I have heard is that the voices of sessional instructors are just not being heard. They're not getting out there. And it's horrifying in some respects to keep hearing that there are so many tenure track and tenured professors who are still or said that they were shocked to find out about these conditions. That's really disheartening, because we've been writing and publishing about this for years. And I think it's a real problem when you have a huge portion of your workforce who are working for what is essentially minimum wage, 60-hour weeks, with no job security and no chance of promotion. You know, so there's been in these discussions, as well as a lot of anger and bitterness about whether or not anyone here is actually invested in change, or whether this is just an attempt to have discussions that will never go anywhere. Because a lot of these are about, like, what are we going to do? But I think something that is really important is that the Precarious Historians Manifesto has laid out in extremely clear detail what should be done at every level of the academy. It's very clear, it's very plain. These are not, you know, revelations. They are not things that are hard to do. They're things that you can do as a tenure track or tenure professor, changes that you can make. They can have a real life impact. Because I think the reality is that we've talked this issue to death. Over the past 11 years that I've been an academic, I have seen countless news articles, I've seen academic articles, blog posts, podcasts, whatever, about the problem of precarity. And if we could solve this problem by talking, I think it would have been solved by now. But I think the time has come to stop talking. You know, we need to start actually making changes. We need to do something. But I'm honestly really pessimistic about whether or not anything is actually going to happen in the wake of these sessions. You know, I've seen initiatives like this before, and people have great intentions and are very well-meaning, and it goes precisely nowhere. And I don't want that to happen. But like I said, I've seen this happen too many times. So rather than trying to convince people in this session that precarity is an issue that needs to be taken seriously, or talk about what needs to be changed, since, like I said, I think it has been written out in great detail, I wanted to say something directly to all of the people who are listening to here. are listening to this discussion. So first of all, to my fellow sessional instructors, I love you. You're amazing. None of this is your fault. You have done nothing wrong, and you are not alone in your experiences. This profession would like to tell you that you are a failure because you have not achieved a tenure track or tenured position, but that is wrong. You are not a failure. If anything, you are our salvation and the best hope that this profession has for the future. Your strength and your resilience are what will save us in the end, if we can be saved at all. And I see you. I feel your pain. I'm with there. Yeah, it sucks. To the graduate students who are listening out there, you deserve better. You deserve better from everyone at every single level of this world. I don't care what anyone says, being a sessional is not a career path. There is no honor in suffering for this profession. You deserve to be paid a fair wage for the work that you do. You deserve to be able to pay for your rent and afford food at the same time and do things like go on vacation. You do not exist solely to be exploited by university system and professors that benefit from your grant money and your cheap labor. You deserve way better. And also, I wanted to tell you that life does not have to be this hard. There is a world outside of academia where they are looking for bright, young, motivated people. And there are places where your work will be valued and appreciated. And I would encourage you to explore those avenues. To tenure track professors and tenured professors who signed the open letter several months ago, thank you so much for doing that. That is one of the most concrete steps that I have seen tenure track and tenured professors take in a very long time. And I don't know if you will ever understand the depths of gratitude that many of us have expressed behind the scenes. But at the same time, and to people who have not yet signed the open letter, I would say step up. This is your time. This is your moment to step up. We have talked ad nauseum about the fact that you benefit from a system that systematically exploits the labor of precarious instructors and graduate students. You might think that you do your best to provide opportunities and empowerment, and that this has nothing to do with you, but it does. It doesn't matter what your intentions are. You are still benefiting from this system that is extremely exploitative. And you might wring your hands and say, you know, well, it's the department, there's nothing I can do, but you're the department. The department is made up of professors. And the same thing with the administration. I hear a lot of people being like, oh, well, you know, we can't decide what to do because the administration makes all the decisions. You know, pardon my French and je m'excuse, but bullshit. You know, who are the administrators? They're professors, you know, and many of you or all of you have job security. You have I mean, you could probably murder someone in broad daylight and not lose your jobs. Okay, you have tremendous power, and you have the power to make changes that will affect and improve the lives of so many people. But I think in the end, it's ultimately on you to use that power. Thank you.
Andrea, thank you very much. Our next speaker is Laura Matacaro, who is an assistant professor at associate professor at Carleton University.
Bonjour. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to participate. I'm speaking to you today from Ottawa, which is situated on the traditional territory of the Algonquin Nation. And I just want to say how grateful I am to be following in Andrea's steps here in terms of the introduction and the way that she's raised the issues for us. I've prepared written comments because I fear that if I don't stick to what I've been thinking about sort of in my core being, I'm going to ramble all over the place. So I'm going to echo, I think, some of the things that Andrea has said. And I also want to say that that my comments today are a reflection based on my own experiences, but they're also a product of conversations that I've been having with friends and colleagues. And I'm very grateful for those conversations. So, and the exchanges that have resulted. I think many people on the call today have been listening to the series and taking away different things from each of the presenters and the Q&As that have followed. And I think, you know, it's obvious that there's an enormous problem and that it's a complex problem. But I think increasingly we're hearing some very pointed messages. And in the last session, Jeremy Malloy said, you can't rely on tenured faculty. And I think that's very true. I think academia is a place driven by competition. It's driven by precarity, which is woven into the system, whether it be hiring or peer review processes. And I think the challenge of overcoming self-interest and seeing how we benefit when others suffer is critical and central to any work that's going to happen moving forward. I also think there's more than one problem. Andrea spoke to that very eloquently, as have other presenters. And there are a diversity of solutions. And I actually think it's important that we have these conversations because people are going to come at the issues and at the solutions from various perspectives. And I think it's really important that there be a forum, even if it takes time and energy and it's frustrating. We need to have these conversations in order for people to be engaged, not only with identifying the problems, but also thinking about the solutions. So there are huge structural issues, which many people have spoken about, and they require radical solutions in terms of the workings of global capitalism, the nature of universities in 2021. But what I want to focus on today is something that I've been thinking about over and over again, ever since the manifesto came out last spring and over the course of this past year. And that's on the role of the individual. It's interesting, hearing Andrea speak and going back to the manifesto. The manifesto identifies departments, unions, professional associations as agents of change, but actually stops short of naming individuals and saying, you need to do something. And the more I think about it, the more I come back to this core point, which I don't want to be cliched, but it is, we are the CHA. If we're going to think about what the CHA is going to do, we have to recognize that whether we're current members, past members, potentially future members, we are the CHA. And so the question of what the CHA can do means thinking about what we can do as individuals with the larger goal, I think, of a more equitable and just society in mind. So based on the manifesto, I have a couple of ideas. Most obviously, I think the CHA should absolutely address the 8 calls to action. So beyond endorsing the manifesto, do the following things: collect data on the labor conditions of members, proactively search for opportunities to advocate for precariously employed historians, stop the practice of conflating support for alternative academic careers with addressing the working conditions of precarious historians, and the practice of identifying conference attendees by their institutional affiliation, refer to contract academic workers by their titles in public, create a protocol to report and limit the plagiarism of precarious historians' work, change the way we talk about precariously employed historians, and seek to learn about the material conditions of precariously employed historians. I also think the CHA can make a fundamental difference in terms of how it thinks about its work and its membership. What if every initiative and every piece of advocacy was imagined in terms of our most vulnerable, exploited, and precarious colleagues? What if that was the starting point? And how might things look different? So I'll just describe what the CHA website says in terms of advocacy currently. It says the CHA tries to represent the interest of all historians in Canada, regardless of their area of research, with respect to a wide variety of matters. And so, it's interesting that the diversity of research is recognized, but what if we added language that reflected the diversity of historians and their situations in Canada? I think coming up with language that does this will require conversation. It will require a reckoning, but it's also really important. There are also a couple of practical things we can do to build the scaffolding to make this more of a reality in terms of practical things that the CHA can do. I think we can include issues on precarious employment on the agenda for the business part of every AGM at the CHA. We can ensure that precarious instructors are represented on CHA Council, and we can make precarious employment issues part of the annual chairs and directors meeting. I've never attended one of those, but I imagine important things happen there. And so I think that could be something that is discussed. This could include issues around better practices and innovations in equity. I also think that the CHA, and again, we as CHA members, as individuals, can do so much work, in big and small ways. We can, I guess in some ways, I'm speaking directly to tenured and tenure track colleagues here, but we can include precariously employed colleagues on grant applications, since funding bodies prevent them from applying in the first instance in many cases. We can work to erase artificial distinctions whenever possible. Why, for instance, our faculty, our tenure and tenure track faculty listed separately from contract faculty on departmental websites? What purpose does that serve? If we have to have faculty only meetings, then let's organize those separately so we don't have instances where you ask people to leave the room so that you can talk about important issues, right? These are small things, but I think about these as kind of microaggressions that have a cumulative effect. I think we can work to change the stigma around internal hires, recognizing that what makes someone a good colleague is their willingness to show up in all kinds of ways. And I think there really is a problem with the stigma around that language in our current profession and in current academia. And I want to say that I've been aware of these issues since I was a grad student. I think so many of the issues that we're talking about today are rooted in the graduate student experience in terms of how graduate students are funded and trained. You know, funding is such a core element of this. And when I think back on my graduate student experiences, I recognize that I was very aware of many of these issues, and yet I did nothing. And I do think that my silence and my apathy have been part of the problem because I was interested in pursuing my own academic ambitions. And so when I was talking at the beginning about the relationship between the individual and the collective, I'm thinking very much about my own experiences here. I think that I'll just close by saying that as I've been reflecting on this question for months now, I found it incredibly difficult, much like Andrea, to figure out what to say because I recognize the hypocrisy of somebody like myself speaking today, where I have benefited from what is essentially a broken system, right? And so who am I? I think I have a responsibility to say things, but I also have a responsibility to think about who I am, the kind of work that I do, and how it is that I do it. And I think I'll say that I feel much more comfortable speaking out about these issues now that I am tenured. And that says so much about a system that rewards people for doing the right thing, and then they can be safe, and then they can, you know, say more radical things. And so I think that, you know, my example and the example of so many others should make us think about how damaging the system is currently, the structures are currently, where people have to spend time and energy creating something really important like the manifesto when they could in fact be doing other things. And I think we really need to be thinking about how much better our academic culture, our work, our profession could be if we were more generous people. And so I will end there. Thank you very much. And sorry about the sound issues.
No worries, Laura. Thank you very much for those comments. Our next speaker, David Tuff, is a historian of politics, the welfare state, and inequality in 20th century Canada. He has taught at Trent University semi-regularly since 2011 and is on the executive of CUPE Local 3908 there.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, great. So there's a little bit of ambient noise. I'm in the playroom. So if you hear the original Muppet movie from 1979 playing in the background, that's what's going on. I'm very happy to be coming to you live from Peterborough, Ontario, Nogojiwanong, which is the traditional territory of the Mississauga Anishinaabe. So I want to start by saying that we need to approach the concept of the topic of precarity. If we approach it as an individual problem, we end up in serious difficulty. If we approach it as something that's wrong with me, or something that's missing from me, something that tenure track faculty have that I don't have, then we're approaching it wrong. And we end up in a neoliberal trap where it's about my inadequacies or your inadequacies. The problem is the design of the profession. The profession is in crisis. The association is in crisis. The university sector is in crisis. And we delude ourselves around this by normalizing one very exclusive and increasingly isolated form of employment over the others, and sort of pretending that it's still normal. The public accepts this image of the university. It's what they expect. It's what they see in movies and what they hear about comments about academia. And the only times they hear something else, as Andrea said, this has become so cottage industry of stories about precarity, but they're always in the form of a scandal or in the form of a personal narrative. It's always sort of the other university, the other side to universities. And I think that's a symptom of a problem too, that thinking of it as the other university, as the underside of the university is a problem. And I understand why we've had to do that rhetorically to get across the idea that what is on the university webpage is not the true story, but we need to be more outspoken about the fact that this is the university as we experience it, the university as contract instructors experience it, and the university as tenure track faculty experience it, if they're being honest and self-reflexive about it, is the real university. It's not the other academia. So if we, as an association, as a profession, as a group of scholars, if we're determined to move beyond this, how do we begin to understand the profession in ways that treat the job market as the problem and the structure of the profession that arises from the job market as the problem, right? So the first thing that happens if we do that is that the we, what can we do, becomes a much more amorphous and a less of a taken for granted category. So it stops being tenure track faculty deciding what to do for the poor, defenseless contract instructors and starts to become a shared project. People who want to be part of that project are part of that project. So we have to do the work of filling up that identity, that we. It becomes something that has to be actively organized. It has to be, people have to be interpolated as the we. And it's not a membership that we sign on to or a job we're hired into. It's something that we build out of our reality, out of our understanding of the university as we experience it, and not out of a fantastical university sort of cosplaying 1950s university. In order to do this, we have to rethink the idea of leadership in the profession, rather than seeing leadership in the profession as an extension of the service work that tenure track academics are paid to do as part of their employment by universities. Positions in scholarly associations that are serious about precarity need to be paid. Not necessarily paid on a full-time basis, but they need to recognize the labor involved in organizing and encourage people to do organize. Hire people who have a drive to organize and to advocate and pay them to do it. The composition of the leadership of the profession should reflect the profession and the whole profession, not just those who have had remarkable success in it. That's going to take a while. So this is not a transformation that's going to happen overnight. So some version, if I'm thinking in practical terms, some sort of working group that would be tasked with figuring out what the shape of the association should be coming out of this should happen with a budget, with administrative support, and with accountability built into it. One of the biggest delusions I think that we labor under and that seems to really derail this conversation so often is the idea that that historical inequalities of the profession and neoliberal inequalities are distinct from one another, that they operate completely separately. So departments, in the last few years, departments have hired Black and Indigenous scholars into tenure track positions, which is amazing. But if you also ignore the working conditions of people outside the tenure track, which includes scholars of color, you can't say that you're including scholars of color if you're continuing to treat scholars of color who aren't on the tenure track as kind of disposable. So when I did my PhD, the department I did my PhD in, there was one Black tenure track scholar and one contract instructor scholar. So there was a lot of, obviously the person who was hired in the tenure track position, who was a recent hire, had a lot of administrative responsibilities, a lot of sort of public relations assumptions were built into their job. So it's not an enviable position to be the one scholar of color in a department. But for the contract instructor, there was no discussion about what their role was going to be in the department. What were they contributing to the department? So they were treated, their labor was treated as disposable in exactly the same way that other scholars who aren't affected by those kinds of oppression were treated. In my union local at Trent, Anishinaabe elders and language teachers are also contract instructors. They're hired on 4-month contracts, and even after they've been working at the university for decades, one time the university just won't offer the course that they teach. So when we talk about collecting data on precarious instructors, this is the kind of discussion we want to be having. So we don't. I totally agree with Andrea's point that we need to have there are separate discussions, but there are also overlapping discussions where you can't talk about how scholars of color are treated in departments if we don't include scholars of color who don't have tenure track positions. The university as we experience it isn't the other university, it's our university, for better or for worse. So it's a university in which there is no tenure, there's no academic freedom, there's no research leave, there's no travel allowance. It's a university, it's a real thing. It's not something that is only experienced by people in a particular instance. This is a real thing. It's a university in which some scholars are tasked with deciding which of their fellow scholars will be able to earn money teaching. So this is not something that can be the horizon of our association, of our understanding of the profession. When we see ourselves as scholars organizing together rather than people with a problem, we open up possibilities of wider solidarity on campus, with cleaners, with food service workers, with students, but also off campus with other parts of the labor movement. Because our university, if we project our working conditions as the tenure track, that's a very something that's very difficult to relate to. But when I describe my working conditions to food service workers at Trent, they actually feel sorry for me that my working conditions are in some ways worse than theirs. So that's an important thing to remember. So I applaud anyone who manages to leap over the chasm from precarious employment to secure employment, is able to write their books, is able to do their research. And I totally sympathize with what Laura was saying about how your research is important. You want to do your research. And as a tenure track faculty member, that becomes your main priority. But we should never celebrate leaping over that chasm when we could be destroying that chasm and creating an association that creates linkages across that chasm. An association of scholars operating under neoliberalism needs to be active in pushing against the deepening inequality in the profession, not as an extra thing, but as that should be the nature of the association. It needs to redistribute resources. It needs to be an instrument of solidarity for everyone teaching history, not an association of those who have tenure track jobs teaching history. It needs to work on broadening and organizing a we that can be effective in opposing neoliberal austerity. And I think that's how we should be talking about this issue.
Thank you, David.
Thanks.
Our next speaker, Latisha Johnson, is a PhD candidate in history at the University of Saskatchewan. She is currently the graduate student representative on the CHA Council and a member of the CHA's Graduate Student Committee.
Thank you, Barrington. Can everybody hear me? I've been having audio issues all week. Okay, I'm getting thumbs up. Thank you. So yeah, as Barrington said, my name is Latisha Johnson. I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of History at the University of Saskatchewan, which resides on Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. And I want to start by saying thank you to the other presenters. Truly, this has been a tough conversation to think about, and we've all acknowledged struggling with what we were going to talk about. So thank you for being here and engaging with this. Thank you also to everyone who's able to join us today. And I want to say thank you especially to those who have taken the time to acknowledge graduate students in their own reflections. So I'll admit, when I was asked to participate in this discussion, I was immediately conflicted. Deciding what I could add to this conversation and preparing to speak in this space has certainly taken up time, energy, and labor on my part and on behalf of my friends and colleagues who were helpful in bouncing around ideas and reminding me of important details that I should consider. And I find I'm somewhat conflicted between two sides of myself today. On the one hand, I am the current graduate student representative on CHA Council, and at a panel that asks, what can the CHA do? I feel like this position means I should be listening rather than speaking. I'm part of the CHA in a way that my fellow graduate students are not. I get to sit at the virtual table and hear discussions and debates within the CHA Council, particularly about their commitments to precarious historical instructors. But at the same time, I am one graduate student voice at a table of a dozen or so early career or senior historians, many of whom are tenure or tenure track professors. I am far from the voice of all of those concerned who I am tasked with trying my best to represent at that table. So I hope that these reflections will offer the CHA some tangible actions which can be acted upon to increase graduate student voices in these discussions about precarity and certainly beyond this theme. There are, I think, immediate steps that the CHA can take to expand graduate student voices on council and in general. I'm happy to speak to some of this during the question period, but for the purpose of today, I would prefer to spend my time speaking to the other side of me, if you will, and that is my more general role as a graduate student. As my fellow council members can appreciate, I've worn my CHA hat a lot this week, so I'm happy to somewhat switch now to some more personal reflections and commentary that I think are also needed. I believe, and correct me if I am wrong, but I believe I am the first current graduate student to speak at any of these precarity webinars. From what I recall, this is the case. And if that is so, I think this is quite telling. And that I am the next to last, there's two more presenters, that I am almost the last to present my thoughts and experiences on this topic speaks volumes. I will preface my personal reflections and comments by saying that I know nothing I am pointing out here today is news, especially to graduate students. I don't have any groundbreaking observations to share, but rather I want to reinforce that graduate students too feel the impact of precarity within our profession, and to voice some points that I think need to be remembered and need to be said within this forum to remind us of this position. And as Andrea and others have pointed out, this has been talked to death, but we are here, we are talking, so I will talk these points to death again. My main goal today is to share some personal reflections, some thoughts I've shared widely among graduate students and that they've shared with me. Encourage the CHA, everyone here, those who may listen to this roundtable later, to think about where graduate students fit into your understanding of precarity. As the Precarious Historical Instructors Manifesto says, for many of us, the life of precarity begins in graduate school. And this is certainly a reality that's been spoken to here today and in previous roundtables. It's been acknowledged that not only do systems of precarious employment limit our supervisors' abilities to give us time and guidance, but they also are pushing graduate students more and more into sessional and contract positions that delays our work without program or funding extensions to match, and is often brushed off as professional training. Then again, in some respects, I hear the argument and I respect the argument that in some ways graduate students may have more security. In some cases, financially, we are better situated to apply for funding. We have institutional access to resources, and we have a plethora of student and union benefits at our disposal. But within this security is a range of precarity as well. Funding packages vary wildly between graduate students, and security in these respects is only short-lived. And I do not mean to conflate issues that may need to be separately addressed, but rather, I think, on theme with the rest of the presenters today, I want to highlight the ways in which our experiences are becoming increasingly similar. There's an opportunity here to work for change. And if we agree that the struggles of precarity begin in graduate school, then quite simply, graduate students need to be a part of these conversations and the actions working towards change. We come into our programs excited. We love our work. That's why we're here. We've been told since day one, You will not get a job in academia. Make sure you diversify your networks. Look beyond academia for job prospects. I can say that I've been very appreciative of the frank conversations I've had with mentors along these lines. But I'm here anyway. We join programs anyway. We pay tuition, we teach classes. Our cheap labor is relied upon. We grade papers, we offer guidance to undergraduate students. We're doing this labor as well. And I have to say that the tone among graduate students right now is not an inability to see these realities. It's actually quite the opposite. If the pandemic has revealed anything to us, it's that the system is very much broken. This last year has exposed overwhelming concerns among graduate students in my own community here in Saskatoon that feel as though we are powerless, we are stuck in a broken system, compromising and giving too much of ourselves to a system that has positioned us as an afterthought. And we are conditioned to think that this is normal, even acceptable. On a more personal note, reflecting on a very recent experience, I recently gave a guest lecture for a contract instructor in my department. She was a fellow graduate student at the time. I was shocked and brought almost to tears when she gave me an honorarium after my virtual lecture. And obviously this should not be the case. But here she was, a contract instructor, a graduate student, honoring the simplest of actions outlined in the manifesto. She didn't question whether this was an opportunity to practice my teaching skills. Rather, she recognized that my time was my own and that this extra labor deserved to be acknowledged through a means of pay. I've given multiple guest lectures for far more senior faculty members with no equivalent acknowledgement of the time it took me to prepare or to give that presentation. Again, think and ask, where do graduate students fit within these complicated labels of precarity? Think about how you can take action in your position to acknowledge the precarity among graduate students. In this instance, it was through an honorarium. If you're a member of faculty who takes on graduate students, I think there needs to be more recognition of the fact that part of the responsibility you've taken on as a supervisor, a mentor, is to advocate for us. I've been really fortunate to have supervisors who do just that, but their own precarity keeps them from speaking up at times, which only further exacerbates the problem. If you participate in CHA activities, simple steps: continue to acknowledge graduate student perspectives, ask for our opinion, encourage us to speak, give us the space to do so. We have a lot to say. If we aren't training to be a part of the academic job market, then offer support of alternative avenues. Give us or campaign for us to have monetary and time-based space to explore alternative avenues and decide what parts of our work we love the most, which we may be willing to sacrifice for, if any at all. Otherwise, as others have said, our graduation only exacerbates the issue of precarity that we have at hand. Our experiences of precarity are not the same as those who are graduates and are precarious historical instructors, but no two experiences of precarity are. As graduate students, we hold positions of precarious employment and precarious funding packages while still being categorized as students. We're marginalized within departments, universities, and larger associations, and these marginalizations are certainly not felt equally. We're expected to call out powers and structures of injustice with little to no support or guarantee that such action won't come back to hurt us. What I hear among my own community and speaking from my own experiences is that we need recognition that precarity is a part of our experience as well. Graduate school is not just a prelude to a time of precarity. We too are precarious historians. These panels have been a much needed conversation, but action is needed. And I hope that the CHA can tackle the perception that these discussions will end here with concrete action. I'll just end with one last request, I suppose we can call it, that I feel deeply myself and I relay from my fellow graduate students 1 year into a pandemic in which we have witnessed varied levels of dedication to graduate student health, success, and professional mentorship. And that is to please do not allow graduate students to become an afterthought in this discussion. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Letitia. A white settler currently living in Jojage, Chenier is a professor of history at Simon Fraser University. After 5 years serving as president of Academic Women, they published Radical Inclusion, which offers a bold new approach to thinking about ways to address white supremacy, racism, sexism, heterosexism, and ableism. It calls for an ethic of care, grounded in solidarity across difference. They currently work with a variety of organizations and institutions on ways to implement radically inclusive approaches. Al?
Thank you, Barrington. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, everybody who's here. I'm really pleased to be a part of this conversation. And, you know, I mean, I'm not being glib here at all. Like, I really don't have anything to contribute. I mean, it's been said, right? The presentations have been excellent, both today and previously. The manifesto is excellent. But what I did do was, so this report, and I've shared a link in the chat, which you can download if you like, calls for a radically inclusive approach. And so I think I was invited to talk about, you know, how could we apply some of these principles to this conversation? So that's my contribution to this conversation today. I think there's a lot of symmetry between what I'm going to say and what has already been said. So I'm really excited about that. However, I am also going to do something very different, which is in about 2 minutes, I'm going to ask you all to stop, close your eyes, and take a breath with me. And I invite you to not only do it with me, but also to open your mind to the possibility that it is as political as signing a petition and a manifesto. So sometimes we start with the simple things. Okay, so last summer, I released this report using my oral history interviewing skills, as well as decades of feminist, queer, and anti-racist analysis. I set out to document the experiences of female and non-binary faculty. The process of doing this changed me and radically changed what I see as the path forward for doing structural institutional change. So here are the 4 main principles. And I'm sure you all know that you can change to speaker view if you want to get a better view of what I'm sharing with you in my shot. So the radical inclusion is based on these 4 principles: deep listening, an ethic of care, grounded in solidarity across difference, and accountable leadership. All of this rests on deep listening. That's where it has to start. But this doesn't come naturally to us anymore. We have super busy minds. We have tons of stress and a million distractions. Most of us are not even listening to ourselves, to our own bodies. So here is where I invite you to join me by raising your hands and then lowering them to your belly, closing your eyes just for a moment, allowing yourself to feel into your body, and just take a breath in, a long, slow, deep breath. And then allow that breath to come out. Long, slow, deep. And let's just try that one more time. A slow, deep breath in and letting it go. Well, thank you everybody for the participatory part of this presentation. I do that with you because I think an ethic of care depends on our capacity to deeply listen to each other. And if our minds are racing a million miles a minute, thinking about the next thing we have to do, the groceries we need to pick up, whatever it is, it's really, really hard to be present with each other and really hear. And I think, as everyone in this room probably appreciates, we need to hear what's being said today, and we need to really deeply hear it. So I want to share with you this cartoon, which really captures, I think, everything. And I'll just give you a moment to read it. So what we see in this cartoon is that the maintenance worker only sees the ramp as a modification for people with disabilities. He cannot see what is being pointed out to him, which is that if you clear the ramp, everyone has access. But in the mind of the maintenance worker, the ramp does not serve everyone. It only serves the interests of the abject minority, the marginal. When he sees a ramp, he sees only disability. But what we need him to see is access. And this is what it means to listen deeply. We could also call it seeing deeply. This is what it means to have an ethic of care grounded in solidarity across difference. So the theme of this third seminar is what can and should be done as a discipline, and what role can the CHA play? And this aligns with principle number 4, which is accountable leadership. But we have to ask, accountable to whom? And that is the question all of the speakers have brilliantly and clearly and forcefully laid out in this presentation today. Precarious workers are the abject. I don't think any of us would disagree with that. And graduate students are an afterthought if they're thought of at all in the context of this conversation. So thank you for making those points. And so we need to see ourselves as accountable to all of these folks. The manifesto says that there is a crisis in working conditions for the precariously employed. It is largely invisible at both department and association levels. But what I want to suggest to you is that it's not invisible at all. It's just that we're not seeing. It's right there before our very eyes, but we just don't see it. So to me, the question is, why don't we see it? And so this is why I agree very much. What I'm saying here today is very much in line with some of the things that have already been said, is that, you know, we are the CHA. It starts with us. We have to see. And of course, I'm speaking to my fellow tenured faculty here. We need to see what is there. It's not invisible, it's very visible. And as it has been pointed out over and over again, we rely on it, in fact. You know, in the same way, we rely on all those cleaners and grocery store clerks that we've been praising through COVID, and who will be quickly forgotten as soon as the moment has passed, right? As historians, we know this, we're familiar with this. So everything in our culture, and here I include everything from how we socialize with each other to how we earn money and how we formulate policy, how we practice history even, encourages us not to see it or discourages us from seeing it. So what can and should the CHA do as our professional association? So yes, as Chandra Pasma suggested in the first seminar, we need to demand change at the top. We can advocate for more federal funding. We can work with other scholarly associations to lobby Canadian universities to change their approach to filling the funding gap. But the work has to start with us, and how well we do that work will be determined by the regard in which we hold each other as people, as living human beings. And this is more than making sure you have, for example, a Black historian on the CHA board, to the checkbox approach to EDI that so many of us are familiar with and gutted by. As many of you now know, this morning the CHA withdrew from Congress. And I want to say two things about that. First, as someone who's been around for a little while, the CHA, it seems to me, is changing. It is becoming more advocacy oriented, and it's going to need all of us to play a part, to give our time, our expertise, and care when and where we can. But the second thing I want to say is that political solidarity is great. In fact, it's important, it's vital. But an ethic of care means that we're driven by needs, not by political stances. So in this case, the boycott is driven by a need for Black people to be able to exist in all spaces at all times as fully human. The need that the CHA fulfills is to provide a forum for career advancement and intellectual community. So now that we've decided to stand with the Black Studies Association and boycott Congress, we can take a next step by building a ramp, by creating an opportunity to fulfill that need, for example. But like the ramp in the cartoon, it needs to be seen as access for all, not just accommodation for the oppressed. So in this example, for example, it's an opportunity for everybody who is on the margins of the institution, right? Not just say, for example, okay, well, we're going to stand with the Canadian Black Studies Association, so we'll create an opportunity just for Black scholars. So this is the way in which I think when we look at the ramp as an access point, solidarity politics is really meaningful, right? That we see it's in the interest of everybody collectively, everybody on the margins, everybody who is precariously positioned. And of course, it's also in my interest too, as someone who's tenured. So in this way, everyone who most needs the opportunity for career advancement and everyone who wants to provide that opportunity can come together and support that mutual goal. If we go about our business guided by the principles of radical inclusion, if we approach our work and our colleagues with an alive awareness of and sensitive attunement toward those around us, we will soon wonder how we could have lived any other way. Thank you.
Thank you all for those words. Our final speaker is Harold Bérubé, who is professor at the Université de Sherbrooke. His academic background is in history and urban studies. He's a member of the Laboratoire d'Histoire et de Patrimoine de Montréal and of the Center for Interdisciplinary Research on Montreal. He is also co-editor of the Urban History Review. He is currently preparing a research project on the role of the press in the urban ecosystem between 2006 and 2015. He has played various roles on the board of the Institut d'Histoire de l'Amérique française.
Merci beaucoup. Merci d'être ici. Merci à la Société historique du Canada et spécialement Stephen Hay de m'avoir invité à participer aux discussions. Et j'aimerais commencer par faire écho aux commentaires de Andrea Edinger. Un peu comme elle, mais pour des raisons totalement différentes. J'ai également été tenté de me retirer de l'événement pour des raisons qui sont en quelque sorte liées, mais diamétralement opposées. Je ne croyais pas qu'il était nécessaire qu'un autre professeur, avec sa permanence, vienne intervenir. Pour moi, le contenu du manifeste est très clair et je me demandais bien ce que j'allais pouvoir ajouter à la discussion. Et déjà, je vois que plusieurs des choses que je voulais dire ont été mentionnées. Et je ne pense pas que c'était absolument nécessaire. Mais il y a une deuxième raison aussi, et ça fait référence au Black Sludge dont elle parlait tout à l'heure. Comme diplômé, j'ai fait des applications à des postes. J'ai eu une entrevue que je surnommais l'entrevue de la dernière chance, et je l'ai eue par chance. Mais à l'époque, il était clair pour moi que je voyais cette précarité et je n'avais pas l'intention de boire le Black Sludge. Pour moi, il était clair que j'allais aller vers ces autres contrées que mentionnait Andrea. Il n'était pas question pour moi de composer avec ça. Donc, je me sentais un peu peut-être hypocrite d'intervenir là-dessus, mais bon, je vais y aller. Écoutez, en deux ou trois temps, rapidement parler de mon expérience à moi, rapidement de parler un peu de ce que je connais de l'Institut d'histoire d'Amérique française. Le thème de la séance, la Société historique du Canada, que peut-elle faire? J'amène un peu la perspective de cette haute association qui touche le plus les historiens francophones. Donc, parler un peu de mon expérience avec cette association-là, pour faire quelques modestes propositions additionnelles sur ce qu'elle peut faire pour aider donc les historiens en situation précaire. Alors, écoutez, comme je vous dis, je parle d'une situation, j'en suis conscient, doublement privilégiée. Je suis professeur titulaire, je travaille dans une petite université régionale avec une petite équipe, je suis syndiqué, nos chargés de cours sont syndiqués, nos assistants de recherche étudiants sont syndiqués. Donc, sans dire qu'il n'y a pas de problème chez nous, c'est pas vrai, mais il y a une structure, il y a un filet de sécurité quand même plus important, je le constate, que dans d'autres institutions présentement. Et quand je dis que je suis doublement privilégié, je pense beaucoup à l'intervention de Jérémy Meloy, m'a beaucoup marqué lors de la dernière table ronde, cette idée de « kill the hope », de tuer cet espoir que certains profs, à mon avis, entretiennent encore, et malgré tous les discours sur la professionnalisation, sur aller voir ailleurs, je sens quand même que les professeurs sont encore nombreux à entretenir, en tout cas chez leurs étudiants, de faux espoirs, peut-être par rapport au marché du travail, et très sensible aussi à sa question de comment on retourne contre eux, les historiens en situation précaire, leur amour de l'histoire. Donc, je me sens doublement privilégié parce que j'ai un directeur de thèse qui très tôt dans ma carrière a tué l'espoir à coup de marteau, puis m'a appris à aimer très prudemment ce que je faisais et avec une certaine distance. Donc, je lui suis très reconnaissant. Donc, écoutez, je vais vraiment arrimer ma présentation donc, à ce qu'une association comme la Société historique du Canada et comme l'Institut d'histoire d'Amérique française, qu'est-ce qu'elles peuvent faire? Donc, comme je vous dis, de 2006 à plus ou moins 2015, j'ai joué différents rôles au sein de l'Institut d'histoire de l'Amérique française. C'est l'organisation que je connais le mieux. Écoutez, je fréquente le congrès de la Société historique du Canada, mais j'en connais moins les rouages internes. Donc, je vais surtout parler de mon expérience par rapport à l'Institut. Évidemment, je ne suis pas ici comme un porte-parole de l'Institut. Au contraire, je parle de l'Institut parce que c'est l'association que je connais. Donc, la question, qu'est-ce qu'elle peut faire? Je me suis vraiment creusé les méninges en relisant le manifeste, en relisant les actions très précises qui sont proposées, et ce sont de bonnes actions. Je suis d'accord avec toutes les mesures qui sont proposées là, mais je ne pouvais pas m'empêcher de revenir toujours à cette idée que qu'est-ce qu'elle peut faire? Et il y a une petite voix dans mon cœur qui disait pas grand-chose. Qu'on allait forcément être déçu par ce que les associations peuvent faire, et à mon avis, pour deux raisons. D'une part, pour moi, la précarité devient de plus en plus caractéristique de la discipline historique, c'est-à-dire, je suis conscient que je parle d'une précarité très différente de celle que vivent les chargés de cours, que vivent les gens qui ont signé, préparé le manifeste, mais une précarité quand même. Précarité, nos admissions sont en déclin, le nombre de professeurs est stagnant. Donc, on n'est pas dans une position de force. Donc, cette précarité, elle est là de manière plus structurelle, et je la vois dans nos associations, je crois. En tout cas, je sais que je la voyais à l'Institut, et je la vois encore, dans le sens où on a des organisations dont la position est précaire, qui mobilisent l'énergie, les ressources dont elles disposent en bonne partie pour maintenir leur financement puis organiser des activités annuelles. Donc, il y a une partie de moi qui ne peut pas m'empêcher de dire que les forces pour changer les choses sont ailleurs. Et ce n'est pas une sorte d'aveu de démission, mais je le vois comme une sorte d'ajuster nos attentes de manière réaliste. La deuxième raison pour laquelle je suis un peu sceptique de ce que les associations peuvent faire pour les historiens en milieu précaire. Et là, donc, ce que Chenier a dit me rassure un peu, cette idée que les associations se transforment, je l'espère, mais pour moi, au bout du compte, elles demeurent des associations qui ont été conçues et organisées dans les dernières décennies, d'abord et surtout pour répondre aux besoins des professeurs-chercheurs, et elles sont pensées en fonction de ça. Il faut un peu les tirer par l'oreille pour qu'elles interviennent à l'extérieur de ce mandat-là, à la fois à cause des ressources, mais à la fois à cause de la façon dont elles sont définies. Et on le voit dans la composition de leur conseil d'administration, et je suis allé revoir la composition. On a le chercheur indépendant occasionnel, on a le représentant étudiant, mais globalement, on a une vaste majorité de professeurs. Donc, c'est un peu du tokenisme jusqu'à un certain point, à mon avis. Et donc, forcément, même avec de la bonne volonté, la voix des historiens en situation précaire est peu ou pas entendue. Et donc, il y a ça, et il y a la nature générale de leurs activités. Encore là, je parle surtout de ma connaissance de l'Institut, mais son énergie va à la production de sa revue, à l'organisation des congrès annuels, à quelques interventions dans les médias où il y a des professeurs justement qui trouvent le temps d'écrire des textes rapidement, mais difficilement au-delà de ça. Donc, je ne veux surtout pas dire qu'elles ne peuvent pas rien faire. C'est surtout pas mon intention, et encore là, j'ai vraiment l'intervention de Jérémy Meloy en tête. Je ne suis pas sûr que c'est d'elle qu'il faut attendre une action ou des changements qui vont avoir un impact majeur par rapport aux problèmes qui sont soulevés dans le manifeste. Donc, je ne vais pas arriver seulement ici avec ce constat-là pessimiste. Il y a quand même pour moi des choses qu'on peut et qu'on doit faire. Comme je vous dis, je suis d'accord, les propositions qui sont dans le manifeste peuvent être mises en action. Plus largement, pour moi, il y a des choses vraiment très concrètes et importantes et structurelles qui doivent être faites. Il faut que les historiens en situation précaire aient une plus grande voix au chapitre. Il faut leur donner plus de place au sein des instances décisionnelles des associations. Et non seulement ça, mais il faut leur donner les moyens d'intervenir. Présentement, avec la pandémie, ça va bien. On se rencontre en ligne comme ça, mais je sais que le CA de Côte d'Ivoire se rencontre généralement à Montréal. Il faut se déplacer, il faut avoir du temps. Donc, c'est clair que les associations, mais avec leurs maigres ressources, peuvent certainement faciliter cette participation, donc des gens qui ne sont pas des professeurs avec leur permanence. Et je pense aussi qu'on peut attendre des associations, justement, ce travail de conscientisation. Les tables rondes qui ont été organisées par la Société historique du Canada sont certainement un exemple d'un forum où on peut entendre des voix autres que la mienne et prendre conscience donc de l'ampleur, de la forme du problème. Mais je pense qu'il faut aller plus loin. Il faut que ces conversations-là aient lieu pas seulement à la marge, mais au centre. Hein, il ne s'agit pas simplement d'organiser un panel là-dessus lors du congrès annuel. Il faut en faire une plénière, il faut forcer un peu les gens à venir entendre, à venir discuter de quoi il s'agit. Donc, au-delà de mesures là, un peu qui me semblent parfois un peu superficielles. Et il faut que les prises de position publiques des associations soient plus manifestes et plus clairement senties de ce côté-là, qu'il y ait plus d'énergie qui soit dirigée vers là peut-être que vers d'autres causes vers lesquelles se tournent les associations. Aussi, je pense qu'il faut, une fois qu'on va avoir plus de voix au chapitre qui viennent justement des historiens en situation précaire, il faut probablement avoir une réflexion critique sur le mandat, sur l'orientation de ces associations. Quel est leur but? Est-ce que c'est seulement d'organiser des congrès annuels ou est-ce qu'elles ont justement un rôle politique à jouer? Tout ceci étant dit, et là, c'est le pro-syndicat en moi qui ressort. Comme je dis, pour moi, tout ça, c'est relativement secondaire. Ici, je rejoins à 110% ce que Jérémy Malloy a dit. Pour moi, le principal véhicule de changement, c'est la syndicalisation. Donc, c'est d'organiser les chargés de cours, les étudiants et d'aller chercher des garanties, d'aller chercher. C'est pas du côté des associations pour avoir un rôle d'appui d'auxiliaire, mais c'est la syndicalisation qui est le seul véritable véhicule pour moi qui peut aller chercher des changements durables et importants. Voilà.
Thank you very much, Harold. So I want to thank all of the students and faculty members who participated in today's discussion. I think it was a fulsome discussion. I think it was a difficult discussion, but in the very best sense of the word. I hope that we can move this conversation forward, because I don't think that, as many of you said, this cannot be the final word on the issue of precarity in the academy. And I will say, although I'm not supposed to talk as a chair, I think what COVID has done is bring precarity much closer to a whole lot of folks who never had to think about it before. If you see what's going on in the United States right now with various universities, and these are things that precariously employed folks have been saying for years. So with that, I want to thank everybody for tuning in, so to speak, and for joining the conversation. Thank you to Stephen for organizing these conversations, and I hope you all stay well and that you have an enjoyable and restful weekend.